Welcome back, guys, to the Great Ace Attorney to Resolve, where last episode we attempted to explain Genshin Asogi's silence in the face of falsified evidence by pointing out the jailbreak plot that was planned and enacted, leading to us needing new testimony from those who worked there at the time, when Mel Strongheart, trying to go to recess yet again, stopped from holding proceedings due to both Caidin and Daley Vigil already having been called to the Old Bailey. We then took testimony about the jailbreak plot, with Vigil truly learning he was but a scapegoat thrown out due to others' machinations, with orders from the prosecutor's office that may have come from higher up having authorized everything. Now suspecting that the Asogi Papers we have been given are false, the true ones the weapons used to bargain for Genshin Asogi's freedom, we take testimony about them as we continue to press. We turned the cell inside out looking for it after the execution, but to no avail.
Hold it!
It was the governor who ordered the search for the will, as I understand it. Is that right? Yes, and when I reported back that we couldn't find it, he grabbed me by the cravat and yelled, "Can I have disappeared completely in my face?" Aye, well, it's due to the governor to keep everybody working as hard as they should. I think the governor needs a wee taste of his own medicine, Mr. Naruhodo. The point is, it was clearly considered a very important document, wasn't it? But it proved impossible to find. That's right. Then before I knew it, it was in the morning paper. That blood-curdling article. The executed mass murderer who'd risen from the dead. Oh, you mean... The article based on Mr. Drebber's experience in Logate Cemetery. Yes, that was it. Day after I'd read that news, I was summoned to the governor's office. And that's when the awful accusation was made. That you'd aided Genshin Asogi to escape from the prison, resulting in your immediate dismissal. I'm afraid I really don't remember anything after that. As the governor of the prison, I had no choice. I couldn't have done anything else. I only found out about the Asogi Papers when a directive came telling me to impound them.
Hold it!
And that directive came from the same source as the one instructing you about the jailbreak. Aye, the top levels of the prosecutor's office. What name was on it? I didn't ken before, and I didn't ken now. All I can tell you is that my orders were to do everything in my power to find that document. The directive said it had to be somewhere inside the fellow's cell. Document? Was that the wording? Document, not will. Aye, that's what it said. Am I clutching at straws here? I just wonder if it was really Genshin Asogi's last will and testament that the sender of that directive was after. Continue with your testimony then, witness. The document was in the folds of the fellow's robe that was left in his cell. A kimono, I think it's called.
Hold it!
In Mr. Asogi's kimono? Aye, the one he brought with him when he was locked up. Yes, he was permitted to have his personal effects with him during his incarceration, I understand. That's right. He was granted as much freedom as possible during the few days before his execution. Indeed, he had a number of items of personal significance, I remember. He was very reluctant to part with them. Some books, that kimono, his sword. His sword! Kaluma, the famous sword of the Asogi clan. It bears the soul of my family. I don't doubt it, but I wasn't really getting at that. Forget it being the soul of the clan. Could the man have had a more obvious weapon? Have some respect, Inosuke. Respectful silence? The warders carry firearms at all times and the inmates have shackles around their ankles. He couldn't have hurt anybody with that thing. Still, he was allowed a sword, but no writing materials? Aye. He wrote that will before he came to stay with us at Bartley, you see. We know different. Dr. Mikotoba was asked to bring the necessary Japanese writing implements to the prosecutor's office. A Suzuri ink stone, black sumi ink, and some handsheet rice paper, no doubt. I was present when he wrote it. But I'm sorry to say, the letters just look like a squirming mass of jet black earthworms to me. Earthworms?
Excuse me.
Thank you for butting in, because we knew that's not true. Are you feeling faint, Mr. Vigil? Mr. Vigil! Sir! It was Scarlet, sir! What? Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to blurt it out like that. Less swaying and more explaining would be helpful. It is something about the testimony we just heard. Have you recalled something of importance? Something of importance? Possibly or possibly not. I'm unable to tell which way he's leaning, I'm afraid. My lord, the defense asks that Mr. Vigil be permitted to supplement his testimony with this possibly or possibly not important detail. Permission granted. Go ahead, Mr. Vigil. Yes, it was Scarlet. As I remember it, the document was written in scarlet ink, but perhaps I'm mistaken. Right, we definitely heard something about that before. And it was one of the most out-of-place things in everything that we've seen. Recent scarlet ink stains visible on the little and ring fingers of the right hand, but no documented corresponding ink was found. So by the look of it, Klint Van Ziek's had wrote something, of which Genshin Asogi was party to and held. Do we present or press? I say we go straight for it, because we were waiting for this to show up.
Objection!
It's too obvious a thing to ignore. It's too obvious a thing for me not to remember. Scarlet-coloured writing is what you said you thought you saw, Mr. Vigil. And I believe that's exactly what you did see. What? Others again! You've no evidence to say that! Have a look at this report. That's my brother's autopsy report. Yes, and there's something in here that's bothered me since I first read it. It states that scarlet-coloured ink stains were noted on the fingers of the victim's right hand. Yes, so it does. So scarlet ink! Now, I'm not familiar with the habits of the British aristocracy, I freely admit, but I would hazard a guess that they don't all go around with ink stains on their fingertips, do they? Your wit is not appreciated. My brother was a well-bred and fastidious man. Should ink have sullied his fingertips, he would have cleaned them immediately. What is your point, counsel? My point is this. Whatever Lord Klint Van Ziek was writing in that unusually coloured ink, it must have been directly before his death, because he died before he had the opportunity to clean his hand. What? I remember something troubled me at the time. At the scene, the lid of my brother's inkwell was open. But Klint was punctilious about such things. It seemed unusual, and no document penned in the colour of the ink that was in the inkwell was ever found. So the document had disappeared. Are you suggesting that the document my father had in his hand that night in his cell was the same document that Lord Klint Van Ziek was writing moments before his death? Then it was. If Mr. Vigil's testimony is to be believed, it can only mean that, yes. Mr. Vigil! Sir! When you spotted Mr. Asogi with the document in his cell, his precise words were as follows, were they not? Alright then, but what's on that paper? A last will and testament. This will is the only weapon I have left now. A last will and testament? Ah! If the conversation really did go as Mr. Vigil says, then what we now know completely changes the meaning of what Mr. Asogi said. You really think? Mr. Vigil did indeed see the convict with a will, but it wasn't that of Genshin Asogi. It was the last will and testament of Lord Klint Van Ziek's. No! What?
Objection!
This is madness. My brother's last will and testament. That would mean that he had chosen to die. That is what it would mean, yes. No, impossible. That is utterly out of the question. Lord Van Ziek's. Klint was pursuing the professor. It consumed him day and night. Whatever happened, he would never have abandoned his investigation before its conclusion. Never! He wouldn't rest until the job was done, until the killer was caught. The idea that he would willingly accept his own death is obscene.
Objection!
And yet, we can be sure that he was writing his will moments before his death. And that Genshin Asogi came to be in possession of that document. So what could the will possibly have contained? Clearly something that couldn't be made public under any circumstances whatsoever. Because armed with that document, my father was able to negotiate with the judiciary for his life. It was something so damning that it prompted the powers that be to enact that daring jailbreak plot. Yes, there can be no question that the will contained information of the utmost secrecy. Information of the utmost secrecy. Ah! No, it couldn't be. I've heard more than enough. Pursuing this notion of a phantom will nobody can attest to what's being seen serves absolutely no purpose.
Objection!
No, my lord. That's unacceptable. What did you say, counsel? The last will and testament that Genshin Asogi had in his possession was that of Lord Klint Van Ziek's. All the testimony and evidence presented to the court has logically led us to that as a possibility. We have a duty to pursue the line of reasoning to its conclusion. But with no possible means of knowing the contents of the document, there is no line of reasoning to pursue. A reason why Lord Klint Van Ziek's, a man of high noble standing, would have chosen death. Information so secret people in the judiciary would be willing to negotiate the jailbreak of a condemned killer. The only explanation that fits those facts is an unthinkable truth that turns absolutely everything on its head. But it's just too hideous. Mr. Naruhodo. However difficult the situation might become, you work with your client in pursuit of the truth. That's what you resolved to do when you entered the courtroom this morning, if I'm not mistaken. Miss Susato. So hold your head high and keep soldiering on. Yes, you're right. 10 years ago, in his final moments, Lord Klint Van Ziek left behind a will. A will that Genshin Asogi was able to use as a weapon to negotiate his escape from prison. In all probability, the details in the will were related to the Professor case. The defense's last statement is mere conjecture. What are you getting at, man? Ryunosuke. As soon as these words come out of my mouth, there's no going back. I believe that the last will and testament of Lord Klint Van Ziek was in fact... Shoot. I will take away a report out of the equation, so it's 50-50. Most choices in the game have been the middle, if you're going to look back at them. An accusation. But why, as a member of the prosecution, why could he not accuse himself and go that rate? Why would he have to die? The only logical thing for him dying at this point would be a confession, right? If he felt he deserved death. Did he do a bad thing? What is he confessing, though? Was he actually the professor? Was he trying to fix the system by killing people? That'd be crazy. But because this turns everything on its head, An accusation's a bit too standard. A report is a bit So it's got to be a confession. Turning things on its head. You can do this, Miss Nalahodo. I believe that what Lord Klint Van Ziek actually penned that day was a confession. A confession? Regarding the mass murderer known as the Professor. And his true identity.
Objection!
Enough. Counsel. What are you saying? Do you even realize? A confession about the true identity of the Professor. That would mean... Lord Van Ziek, I appreciate this must be hard to take in. But it's the only explanation that fits. The killer that terrorized London a decade ago and became known as the Professor. The man believed to have murdered 5 members of the aristocracy. Wasn't Genshin Asogi at all. No, you can't be suggesting... It was in fact the man believed to have been the 5th victim. Lord Klint Van Ziek himself. It's finally open, is it? Pandora's box? The great Van Ziek's family. They've been thoroughbreds of the British judiciary for years. And Lord Klint Van Ziek, he was a paragon of justice in the capital. He was actually a mass murderer. A perpetrator of atrocities of the vilest nature. If the general public ever found out, law and order in this country would be finished. My brother. Oh, this is too awful. Poor Lord Van Ziek. I wonder, though, did he never suspect? Mr. Nalahodo? Lord Barrett Van Ziek is a brilliant prosecutor. Is it conceivable that he didn't realize what his older brother really was? Order! Order! Order in court! Lord Van Ziek. The Professor made use of an enormous hound as his murder weapon. Tell me, did your brother own a dog? Yes, he did. Balmung. It was a well-known hunting dog. People called him a giant. I don't believe this. When my brother would go hunting in the forest of the grounds behind the house, he always took a Balmung. After Klint's death, the creature passed away too, almost as if he were following his master. It was a magnificent hunting dog, worthy of the jewel-studded collar around his neck. A jewel-studded collar? That's right, though sadly, some years ago now, it was stolen by a thief who broke into the house one night. A jewel-studded collar, stolen by a thief. It so happens that myself and my colleagues have come across such a collar during our time in London. How could you? There was an old emblem attached to the collar too, made of pure gold. It was topped with a small crown and bore an ornate capital letter B. What? An emblem bearing the initial B? Oh my, you know it! It's the insignia of the Baskerville family. What? The Baskerville? Why is that name coming up now? Baskerville is the family name of my late brother's widow. That pure gold emblem was an heirloom which Klint acquired upon their marriage. There can be no doubt then. The collar you've described was Balmung's. The family insignia of Lord Klint Van Ziek's widow. There was a considerable amount of blood on the collar when we saw it. Since we know the dog was used for hunting, it could have been from its quarry, of course. But it could equally have been from human prey. So is it true then? Klint Van Ziek really was the professor. Impossible. These Japanese are making it all up to exonerate their own. So in fact, the person responsible for these murders of nobles and royals was a noble himself. And that threatened to be an enormous scandal that would irrevocably destabilize British society. My father knew that and was using it to negotiate his way out of the unjust charges brought against him. But at the very last hour, those he'd bargained with betrayed him, slaying him mercilessly on foreign soil. Well, can you deny it, Lord Strongheart? 10 years have passed, and still now the 6 million inhabitants of our great capital rest easy believing that justice was done. That though his anonymity remains, the diabolical murderer was caught and executed. Very well then, you may have the truth. Tell me then. Tell me what Klint really was. Lord Klint Van Ziek was too pure of heart. When he became a prosecutor and went in pursuit of the black roots of crime, he drove himself into a corner. He came to the uncomfortable realization that to fight the most fiendish of criminals requires one to become even more fiendish oneself. Klint. The 19th century was a truly miraculous 100 years for Great Britain and indeed the whole world. New industry, new technology, and with the birth of the Metropolitan Police Service, new law and order. But these dazzling new developments meant ever deeper shadows were cast on society. Water sullied by factories, air thick with noxious fumes and crime growing daily to fill the darkness. Lord Klint Van Ziek made it his mission to combat that darkness. But as time went on, it slowly ate at his soul, until eventually he was consumed. It's ironic, really, and somewhat surprising, that the truth has once again been unearthed by a Japanese. Once again? What do you mean? 10 years ago, your father, Genshin Asogi, turned up at my office one night. The professor? Yes, beyond all shadow of doubt. You must issue a warrant to search his home at once. Don't be absurd. The man comes from one of our country's most illustrious families. He's a paragon of justice here in the capital. Yes, that's the point. That's why none of you British can see it. He's using his noble status as a diversion whilst he commits these atrocious crimes behind the scenes. Do you have evidence? Nothing definitive as yet. But he keeps an enormous savage hound on the estate. We need the full support of the judiciary for this. We're up against a member of the aristocracy. So a large family estate has a fierce guard dog. You should know that's commonplace here in Britain. I'm sorry, but I can't possibly put Scotland Yard onto this based on the tenuous accusation of a visiting student. That's why I turned down Asogi's plea. And as a result, he took it upon himself to visit the Van Ziek's mansion on his own. We can only imagine now what happened between the two men. Though we know the outcome, of course. Lord Klint Van Ziek perished. I don't believe this. So, in actual fact, Kazuma-sama's father did. He made the late Lord Van Ziek meet the same fate. He put a permanent end to the professor killings by taking the drastic measure of ending the perpetrator's life. As soon as I heard, I hurried to the mansion. When I arrived, it was easy to grasp what had happened. And what about the will? Asogi must have already taken it. Nothing of that nature was found at the scene. We had no idea of the existence of such a document at that time. I was the only person who knew of the true identity of the professor. So, I resolved to keep it a secret, and to guard the secret to the bitter end. So you're admitting to it? That you were behind it all? It was you, then, who pinned the crimes on my father? I did what needed to be done in order to protect the law and order of the British Empire. Even if that meant employing an unforgivable ruse. Then it was you who arranged this fabricated evidence. I ordered that detective to take care of it, whilst keeping the truth from him, naturally. Gregson. Obviously, he opposed me at first. Are you off your rocker? We can't do something like that. Well, there's no question that it was Asogi who murdered Lord Van Ziek's. The house staff have made statements that they saw the man running from the mansion that night. Yes, well, I've no doubt it was that Japanese fella. But we haven't got a shred of conclusive evidence against the man. And worse than that, he doesn't keep a dog, so we're short of a murder weapon to boot. And we're short on time, Gregson. I must put a stop to this man's rampage for the good of the country. So we'll use whatever means necessary. Do I make myself clear, detective? Blimey. So that night 10 years ago, when I was attacked by those thugs in the back streets, and Yenshin's ring was taken, that was him, was it? That was Gregson and some hired help. Then the detective handed the stolen ring to Dr. Wilson, who feigned its discovery from the victim's stomach during that autopsy. And in the light of that decisive evidence, Mr. Asogi was found guilty of the charges brought against him. However, behind the scenes, he had actually already struck a deal with his accusers, in which he agreed to silently accept the charges. But I just don't believe that part. As far as I knew the man, my father despised such underhand dealings. It was extremely easy to make him comply. You see, he had one crippling weakness. What weakness? Isn't it obvious? You, Kazuma Asogi. Me? Perhaps you have no desire to return to your homeland, Asogi. What? Though I hear you have a 14-year-old son. Agree to cooperate and accept your guilt without contention. And you will see Japan and your son again. You scoundrel. However you choose, wisely or not, it will be a closed trial by order of Her Majesty. So whatever rash claims you might make in court, we'll have no trouble in stifling them. There's only one outcome for you, Asogi. The gallows. Don't forget that I still have a weapon at my disposal. A document revealing a truth that I know you're desperate to keep hidden. Yes, it hadn't escaped my mind, which is the only reason I'm willing to bargain with you. I only want to protect this country's law and order. You understand? So, what's it to be, Asogi? Kazuma. He did it for me. And as I told him at the time, my motive was simply to protect Britain from the damage the truth would do. To protect this country's law and order. At any cost.
Objection!
I've never dared let myself even consider this possibility until now. But in the light of all of this treachery, I have to ask. The mastermind behind the Reaper of the Bailey. Was it you, Lord Mel Strongheart? Well, with that accusation levied, and it obviously has to be so, we will leave you for another episode of The Great Ace Attorney 2. There are still things at play here, but let's see where the story goes from this point onwards. Are we at the end of this torrid tale? We haven't even found out who actually shot Genshin Asogi as he escaped from the grave yet. So let's maybe find out next time on The Great Ace Attorney 2 Resolve. I'll see you guys then for more. Bye-bye.